I don't talk about the summer of 2003 much. Not because I've forgotten. No, those memories are burned into me like the charred trunks still standing in what used to be the Shasta Ridge National Campgrounds. I don't talk about it because I've spent the last 20 years trying to make sense of how a group of teenagers could vanish without a trace and how I'm still here. My name is Ethan Keller. I was 17 then, a scrawny kid with a cheap camera, a beaten-up hiking pack, and a craving for independence. That July, I was invited to join a backcountry leadership camp run by my high school, 10 of us all seniors, excited to start our final year. We were supposed to spend 5 days in the forest, learning teamwork, survival skills, and maybe sneak a couple cans of beer past the chaperones. The chaperones were Mr. Hudson, our biology teacher, and Ms. Crane, a young social worker volunteering through the district. Both of them were solid, careful. They'd taken this group out for years, but 2003 wasn't like other years. That summer, California was bone dry. Everyone was talking about the fire risk, but nothing felt urgent, not until the sky changed. We arrived on a Monday. The trail to base camp wound deep into the Sierra Nevada foothills. It took us most of the day to hike in. By evening, we'd set up tents near the river bend and built a fire ring. That first night, we sang dumb songs, roasted marshmallows, and stared up at stars that felt closer than ever. No cell signal, no distractions, just us and the trees. The group was tight even back then. Josh Halpern was the leader, no question. Football captain, church kid, golden retriever energy. His girlfriend, Cara Bowman, was quiet but had this fearless edge. Then there was Miguel Vargas, who never went anywhere without his sketchbook. Dana, who smoked clove cigarettes like she was in a French film. And my best friend, Will Dunn, who once told me he only came on the trip because he knew I hated being alone. There were 10 of us campers in total. We were kids, brave and stupid, and totally unaware of what was coming. By Wednesday, something felt off. The mornings were still, but the afternoons turned strangely windy. The air tasted metallic. Even the birds sounded different. And then there was the smoke. It was subtle at first, just a faint haze on the horizon, but by Thursday morning, everything changed. I remember waking up to shouting. Mr. Hudson was sprinting from tent to tent. "Get up, everyone up, pack your bags now." The smoke was thicker, and ash had started falling like soft snow. The fire hadn't reached us, not yet, but it was coming fast. We moved quickly, too quickly. The plan was to take the West Ridge back to the trailhead, but the path was gone, literally gone. A fire crew would later say a spot fire had jumped the ridge and torn through that section overnight. We were cut off. Panic doesn't hit all at once, it creeps in. First, you realize your lungs are burning. Then your boots are sinking into soft ash. Then someone starts coughing hard. We split into 2 groups. Mr. Hudson took half of us north, trying to reach the river. Ms. Crane led the rest west, hoping to find the logging road. I was supposed to follow Hudson, but I didn't. Will had dropped his inhaler. He was on the ground, gasping. I stayed behind. That was the last time I saw them, the others. Josh, Cara, Dana, Mr. Hudson, gone into the smoke. Somehow, by some miracle or just dumb luck, Will and I found a creek and followed it for hours. We reached a ranger station by nightfall. I don't remember most of that hike, just the sound of my heartbeat and the smell of everything burning. They searched for days, helicopters, dogs, volunteer fire crews, but no one found them, not a body, not a backpack, nothing. It was like the forest swallowed them whole. The official report called it a disaster event with multiple presumed fatalities. The papers ran headlines like "Tragedy at Shasta Ridge" and "10 teens lost in firestorm." But eventually, people moved on. Memorial plaques were mounted. Scholarships were created in their names. The world kept turning. But I never forgot. I kept waiting for something, a clue, a sign, closure. But 20 years went by and all I had was silence until last week. I got a call from a man named Alan Royce. He said he worked for the Forestry Service, said they'd cleared some land northwest of Shasta Ridge to rebuild a fire lookout post, and he said they found something strange, something that didn't match the terrain. He wouldn't say what it was over the phone. He just said this: "You were on that trip in 2003, right? You'll want to see this in person." I didn't sleep the night after Alan Royce called me. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen like it might buzz again and tell me this was some mistake. But it didn't. It just sat there, as silent as the years between now and that fire. By morning, I had made up my mind. I booked a one-way ticket to Redding, rented a beat-up Jeep at the airport, and started driving east toward the forest. The further I got, the quieter everything became. Civilization thinned into gas stations and forgotten diners. The trees thickened and the air changed, cooler, still laced with that smell I hadn't noticed in years, burnt sap and dry pine needles. It hit me somewhere deep, a memory smell, like the exact second between fear and loss. Alan met me just outside the fire zone. He was tall, bearded, with sun-worn skin, and the kind of voice that sounded like he didn't say much unless he had to. "You Keller?" he asked. I nodded. "What did you find?" He didn't answer at first, just motioned for me to follow. We hiked for about 40 minutes through uneven trails, some clearly new, some decades old. At one point, we passed a sign with faded lettering, restricted access, wildfire recovery zone. The edges were singed. Finally, we reached a clearing that didn't feel right. The trees were gone, cleared by the crew, but what got me was the ground. It was flat, too flat, like something had once stood here and been wiped away. Alan crouched beside a half-dug trench near the edge of the clearing. "We were removing debris to lay the concrete for the new tower," he said. "The crew hit something hard, not stone, not metal, wood." I stared at him. He motioned toward the trench. I walked slowly to the edge and looked down. At first I didn't see it, just dirt and char, but then the light shifted and I saw a corner. A wooden board, maybe 3 feet wide, maybe more. Old, blackened, but intact. Alan brushed away more dirt with his gloved hand, revealing something carved into the surface. "Names. 10 of them. Josh Halpern, Cara Bowman, Dana Lewis, Miguel Vargas. All the names from that trip, every single one, including Mr. Hudson and Ms. Crane. They weren't just carved, they were burned in, like someone had taken a hot blade or a branding iron and carefully, methodically, pressed each name into the wood." Alan looked up at me. "You're telling me this was from 2003. I couldn't speak, my throat had tightened into a knot, my knees buckled, and I sat down in the dirt. This wasn't just a coincidence, this was intentional. Someone had been here long after the fire, someone remembered. Or worse, someone survived. Alan handed me a photo in a plastic sleeve. "We found this nearby," he said, "tucked under a rock, sealed in a Ziploc. You might recognize it." It was my old camera. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen that camera since the day of the fire. I lost it during the chaos, thought it had been destroyed, but here it was, mud-stained but intact. Alan pointed. "There's film inside. We haven't touched it. Thought you might want to handle that yourself." Back in my motel room that night, I stared at the camera for hours. My hands shook every time I picked it up. I had to remind myself how to open the back, how to rewind the roll. It was ancient tech now, but muscle memory kicked in. I drove to the nearest photo lab, still willing to process 35mm film. The clerk looked at me like I was holding a museum artifact. "This might take a few hours," he said. "Could be nothing on it after all this time." But I knew there would be. And I was right. When I picked up the prints, the clerk was unusually quiet. He slid the envelope across the counter without a word. I opened it right there. Most of the pictures were what I expected, blurry shots of the group around the fire, hiking, goofing off near the river. Josh smiling, Dana flipping off the camera, while pretending to wrestle a bear. It felt like a lifetime ago. But then I reached the last photo. It wasn't one I remembered taking. It was darker, fuzzier, taken at night, maybe by accident. But I could make out the faint shape of someone, standing alone in the forest, facing away from the camera, just at the edge of the firelight. And something about the way they were standing, something about the angle of their shoulders, the tilt of the head, told me they knew they were being watched. I must have stared at that last photo for 10 minutes before I realized I wasn't breathing right. My heart was thudding like I'd just run a mile, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That silhouette, it shouldn't have been there. We were too deep in the woods and too alone. I wanted to believe it was just someone from our group, caught at a weird angle, maybe during the evacuation, but something told me it was. That posture, that stillness. It wasn't panic, it wasn't fear. It looked like someone waiting, watching. The next morning, I drove back to the site where Alan and his crew had uncovered the names. The trench was already covered again, not buried, just covered in a tarp and marked with hazard tape. Alan wasn't there, but one of the surveyors recognized me. "You the friend from the 3 fire?" he asked. I nodded. They told us to stop digging, some sort of state order, historical preservation or something. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was that someone didn't want this story resurfacing too quickly. I took one more walk around the perimeter before heading back to town. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, maybe just proof that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But about 30 yards past the trench, just beyond the tree line, I noticed something odd. A strip of bark peeled clean off an oak tree, and underneath, someone had carved letters, shallow, rushed, but still readable. Help US. I froze. My first instinct was to question whether it was recent, but the carving had weathered edges, like it had been there a while. Not 20 years, maybe, but long enough to not be brand new. That's when I realized something else. Whoever carved that message had to still be alive, or had been, long after the search ended. That evening I met Will for dinner at a rundown Mexican place outside Reading. We hadn't spoken much since the fire, occasional texts, awkward check-ins, but nothing meaningful. I'd called him after getting the film developed, told him I'd found the camera, told him about the trench. He'd flown in the next day. Will looked older than I remembered, not just physically, but spiritually, like the fire had scorched something inside both of us that never healed. I didn't think I'd ever come back here, he said, picking at his food. Didn't want to. What the hell is happening, Ethan? I slid the photo across the table, the last one, the shadow in the woods. Will stared at it, brows knit tight. I don't remember this. You didn't take it. He shook his head. No, and it's not me. Then who is it? He looked back at me. You think someone stayed behind. I paused or never left. We sat in silence, the kind that fills the space between impossible thoughts. I keep dreaming about it, he said suddenly. The fire, the smoke, but in the dream I'm not running. I'm standing in that forest, looking at someone else running away. I can't move, I just watch. I wanted to tell him I'd been having dreams too, but mine were different. In mine, I was the one lost, and someone else was watching me. That night I went through the photos again, one by one. This time I noticed something strange. In the background of one photo, a group shot near the river on the second day, there was a figure. Far off, barely visible, blurred. At first glance, you'd think it was just one of us, but counting everyone, there were already 10 campers and 2 adults in the frame. This made 13. There had only been 12 of us. I zoomed in as much as I could. The figure was standing half behind a tree, head tilted, arms stiff at their sides. No detail, just shape, but enough to know they weren't part of our group. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I got a voicemail, a number I didn't recognize, male voice shaky, like it had been recorded in a rush. Ethan, this is probably going to sound crazy, but I think I saw one of them. I was up near Dogwood Creek scouting a hunting trail. There was someone out there, looked young, dirty, watching from the trees. I called out, but they ran, thought you should know. No name, no callback number, just that message. Dogwood Creek. It was about 10 miles northwest of where we had set up base camp in 2003. I packed my bag again. I left at dawn. Didn't tell Will, didn't call Alan, just packed water, a flashlight, a GPS in the photo, the one with the figure half hidden behind the tree. Something told me if I stopped to explain myself, I might lose the nerve. I wasn't chasing ghosts. I was chasing the one thing that's worse than grief, not knowing. Dogwood Creek was off-trail, rugged, and mostly forgotten. Locals used to fish there before the fires changed the terrain. After 2003, it became a no-man's land, scorched trees, unstable soil. They put up signs, danger, unmaintained terrain. I passed 3 of them before the dirt road gave out and I had to continue on foot. I followed the creek for hours. It trickled weakly beside me, the water murky and shallow, as if the land itself hadn't fully recovered. The further I went, the more the forest swallowed the sound of my steps. No birdsong, no branches cracking, just the slow, constant rhythm of my own breathing. I kept looking for signs, footprints, broken branches, anything. For a while, I thought I'd imagined the voicemail, that maybe I was just dragging old wounds through old woods. Then I found the boot print. Not mine, not from any ranger crew, too small, too clean, pressed into a patch of wet earth where the creek curved and disappeared behind a thick brush wall. I crouched down. Next to it was something else, a strip of cloth, torn, faded, and dirty, but unmistakably part of a jacket sleeve. A blue one. I remembered it. It looked like the jacket Miguel used to wear. I stood frozen. For 20 years, there'd been nothing, not a single trace, and now I was holding a piece of our past in my hand. I pushed through the brush, heart pounding harder than it had in years. Behind it, the terrain dipped into a natural hollow. The trees here were denser, untouched by logging crews. Moss grew thick on the trunks. Sunlight barely filtered through the canopy, but in that hush I saw it. A small clearing. And in the center of it, a lean-to shelter built from branches and tarp, patched together with old camping gear. Someone had lived here. I approached slowly, calling out, "Hello, is someone here?" No answer, just the wind, but I wasn't alone. The shelter was empty, but worn-in, packed dirt inside, signs of an old fire pit, a pot blackened from long use. There were wrappers too modern, recent. Someone had been eating here, living here, surviving. On one of the inner walls of the shelter, I found something else. A symbol. It wasn't familiar, just a rough carving, a circle with a line through it, etched into the bark of a central support log. Below it, scratched words, "Stay quiet." I didn't know what that meant. Was it a warning, a rule, a message for someone else? I took out my phone and started snapping pictures. That's when I heard it, the faint crunch of leaves behind me. I spun around. Nothing. My breath caught in my chest. I stepped out of the shelter, turning slowly, scanning the woods. "Is someone there?" I said. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Ethan. I was with the campers in 2003. Still nothing. Then movement. Just beyond the tree line, a figure darted between two trunks. I bolted forward, crashing through the underbrush, shouting, "Wait." But the figure was fast, barefoot, agile. They moved like they knew this forest by heart. I chased for maybe a minute, two at most, before I lost them. I stopped, lungs burning, all around me silence. But something had changed. Pinned to a nearby tree at eye level was a photograph. One of the ones from my old camera. It had been nailed there with a rusted tack, faded, curled from moisture. It was the same group shot from the river, all of us smiling, unbroken, just before the world changed. Except this one had been altered. A thick black X had been drawn over Will's face. And next to it, written in jagged ink, "He have left." I stumbled back, my mind raced. Who had written that? Who was still out here? And more importantly, what did Will leave behind? I drove back to town in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the photo like it might disappear if I let go. Will's face, crossed out with thick black ink, kept flashing in my head. "He have left." The words looped over and over. What did it mean? Who had written it? Was it a threat or a memory? When I got back to the motel, Will was sitting on the curb smoking. He stood when he saw me, flicked the cigarette, and walked over. "You found something, didn't you?" he asked. I held out the photo. "Someone left this, nailed it to a tree out by Dogwood Creek." He took it carefully, then stared at it for a long time. When he looked back at me, his face had gone pale. "I don't remember this version," he said. "It's the same shot, except now someone else erased you." Will's jaw clenched. "That doesn't make sense." I leaned against the hood of the car. "What did you leave behind, Will?" "What are you talking about?" "That night, the fire. We both made it out, but the others didn't. Now someone's out there saying you shouldn't have left." He didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the pavement. "I think someone survived," I said, watching him carefully. "Maybe more than one. Maybe they waited for help that never came." Will's mouth opened like he was about to say something, then shut again. "Talk to me, man," I said, softer now. "Did something happen back then? Something you never told anyone?" He finally spoke, but his voice was low. "When you went after my inhaler, I should have gone with you." I stared at him. "I saw where you ran," he continued. "And I was scared. I froze. I thought you'd catch up, so I kept going with Mr. Hudson." I didn't say anything. He took a breath, but we didn't make it far. Maybe 15 minutes down the ridge, the smoke thickened and we lost the path. People were panicking. Hudson told us to stay put while he scouted ahead. He never came back. "What about the others?" "I don't know, it got bad fast." Kara was crying. Dana said she could hear voices in the woods. Then Josh said we needed to move or we were dead. And Will's eyes glistened now. "I ran." "Alone?" He nodded. "You didn't tell the rescue crews." What was I supposed to say? His voice cracked. That I left them, that I abandoned them in the dark. I thought they'd be found. I thought they were right behind me. I let the silence stretch between us. The guilt in his voice was heavier than anything I could have thrown at him. "There's something else," he said finally, "something I've never said out loud." I waited. When I made it out, I thought I saw someone behind me, through the trees. I was half delirious, coughing my lungs out, but I swear someone followed me for a while, never close enough to see their face, just a shadow, watching. A chill ran up my spine. What if someone stayed behind, Ethan? What if they didn't die in the fire? What if they chose not to come back? I shook my head. Then why now? Why surface 20 years later? Why send us clues? Will looked at the photo again. Maybe they're not trying to be found. The next morning, I got a call from Alan. We ran your fingerprints, he said, not even bothering with hello. Hope you don't mind. Had to make sure who you were before I tell you this. Tell me what? Someone broke into the site last night. I sat up straight, the trench. Yeah, tarp was pulled off, dirt disturbed, no signs of animals. They left behind boot prints, barefoot impressions too, and something else. What? A name. I swallowed. Whose? He hesitated. Yours. My blood ran cold. It was carved into the same tree where the other names were, he said. Same style, same depth, almost like it had been added recently. But I wasn't there in 2003, I said, not when they went missing. I know, Alan said, but it's there now, which means someone wants you included. That night I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, mind racing. Someone was out there carving names, leaving photos, sending messages. Someone who remembered everything. Someone who believed we should have stayed, and now they were including me. Not as a survivor, but maybe as the next name to vanish. I drove back to the site first thing the next morning. There was no hesitation this time. I needed to see it with my own eyes, my name, carved into a tree that had no business knowing who I was. When I pulled up, Alan was already there, standing near the caution tape with his arms crossed and a worn thermos in hand. He didn't say much, just gestured for me to follow. We walked in silence until we reached the same tree where the others had been burned into the wood. The bark was already scorched from years ago, but the names had held. Blackened letters, deep grooves. Every time I saw them, they looked more like tombstones than memorials. And now, just beneath Miguel Vargas's name, there it was. Ethankeller. I touched it. The wood was freshly scored. Whoever had done it hadn't just scratched the surface, they'd carved with purpose, like they wanted it to last. You sure you didn't do this yourself? Alan asked. I shot him a look. Didn't think so, he muttered. Do you think someone is trying to rewrite what happened? I asked quietly, like pull me into their version of it. Alan shrugged. Could be, or it could be a warning. Back at the motel, I dug through my old camping journal, a beat-up spiral notebook I hadn't opened since I was 17. Most of it was teenage nonsense. What we ate, dumb inside jokes, tally marks for who tripped over roots the most. But toward the back, I found something strange. A map. Roughly drawn, charcoal smudged. Just a simple sketch of the campground, river, and the ridge trails. But one thing stood out. In the upper corner, where the ink had faded, someone had written in red pen. Don't follow the creek, it circles. I didn't remember writing that. The handwriting wasn't mine. It was tighter, neater. I flipped back through earlier pages and found a few more strange notes, small, cryptic additions squeezed between lines. We heard them last night. Josh said not to look back. There's someone else out here. I sat in stunned silence. Had someone been writing in my notebook during the trip? Or after? That afternoon, Will and I sat on the hood of his rental car, overlooking the forest from a scenic turnout. He hadn't spoken much since the new carving. When I showed him the notebook, he stared at it for a long time, then quietly said, I think we missed something back then. What do you mean? He pointed toward the trees in the distance. The fire didn't just take people. It covered tracks, buried everything we didn't want to see. I asked him what he remembered from that final night, not the chaos, not the smoke, but the last moment before we were split up. He squinted, trying to pull the memory out of wherever he'd buried it. There was yelling, he said, but not from the group, from the woods, voices. They didn't sound right. Not right how? Like they were copying us, like someone was repeating what we were saying, mocking it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Did anyone else hear it? I asked. I think Dana did. She said something about echoes, thought she was losing it. What if they weren't echoes? He looked at me, then whatever was out there wasn't part of us. That night, I had another dream. I was back at the river, the same spot where we took the group photo. Only this time I was alone. The trees were silent, the sky was dark, and across the water I saw them, the 10 of them, lined up on the opposite bank. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared at me. Except one, a figure at the end, shorter, barefoot, head down. When I tried to cross the river, the water turned black and thick like tar. I fell, struggled, sank. And just before I went under, the figure raised its head. It was me. I woke up gasping. Checked the clock, 3:17 a.m. I sat up, drenched in sweat, trying to shake the dream. I reached for my notebook on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. I turned on the lights. It was gone. I stood up, panicked, and started checking drawers, under the bed, my backpack. Nothing. Then I saw it. On the motel room door, something had been written in charcoal. 4 words. 11 WENT, one watched. The words haunted me. It wasn't just the message scrawled on the motel door, it was the math. For 20 years, we believed there were 10 students and 2 adults on that trip, but if the message was right, then we'd miscounted. There was an 11th camper. And someone knew it. By sunrise, I was at the county records office, flipping through boxes of old paperwork, camp rosters, transportation forms, emergency contact lists, anything tied to the 2003 Shasta Ridge expedition. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I kept digging. In one of the archived folders, yellowed, water-damaged, was a photocopy of a handwritten attendance list. The names were familiar: Josh Halpern, Cara Bowman, Dana Lewis will done me, and then, at the bottom, one I didn't recognize. Ellis Marsh. No photo, no emergency contact, just a scribbled name with ALT written next to it. Alternate. I took a picture of the sheet and brought it to Will. He stared at the name for a long time before shaking his head. I don't remember him, he said. Me neither, but someone wrote him down. We called a few of the other survivors' families, parents of those who had lost kids. It wasn't an easy conversation. Most had moved on, in whatever way grieving people can, but when I asked about Ellis Marsh, every answer was the same. I don't know who that is. One of them, Dana's older sister, paused longer than the rest. Then she said, there was a kid I barely remember, small, quiet, kind of kept to himself, might have been him. I just remember thinking he didn't seem like he fit in. That was something. Back at the motel, I ran an online search for Ellis Marsh. Nothing in the school yearbooks, no social media, no records of enrollment in our district. It was like he existed for a moment and then didn't. I tried nearby districts, still nothing, until I searched county juvenile records from that year. There in a sealed PDF was a briefcase summary. ELLIS Marsh, DOB, 403-1987. Foster placement, temporary, Mendocino County. Transferred to Clearview Youth Services, June 2003. Last known location, SHASDA Ridge Camp Program. And then in red ink, scrawled across the bottom. Status unconfirmed, attendance, presumed absent. So he was there. But somehow he was never counted, never claimed, never searched for. I took this to Alan. Why would someone send a foster kid into a fire zone and forget he existed? I asked. He exhaled. I've seen it before. Oversight, paperwork. A kid gets transferred, nobody updates the system, nobody checks the fine print. But someone knew he was out there, someone saw him. Alan nodded slowly, and maybe he's the one who's been watching ever since. Will and I sat in the motel parking lot again, the same as a few nights before. He looked exhausted, like this was draining something from him that he'd been trying to hold on to for years. What if Ellis never left? I said. You think he's the one living out there. Maybe, or maybe he's just the one who never forgot. Will stared into the distance, then said something I'll never forget. That last night when we were running, I remember someone yelling my name. I thought it was Josh or Mr. Hudson, but it didn't sound like them. He paused. It sounded scared, like someone who didn't want to be left behind. My throat tightened. You think it was Ellis? I don't know, but if it was, and I ignored it. He didn't finish the sentence. That night, the power went out in the motel. I woke to complete darkness. My phone had no signal. The hum of the AC was gone. The hallway outside was silent. Then a knock at the door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. I froze. Every instinct told me not to move. Then I heard a voice. Soft male, almost a whisper. "You left me." I stepped toward the peephole, heart in my throat. No one was there. I opened the door, nothing but stillness. But taped to the outside, where the charcoal message had been the night before, was a new note. This one written in thin, tight handwriting. "Meet me where the fire stopped." And below it, "We them." I left before the sun came up. The note had been folded with care, taped precisely in the center of the motel door, not like a prank or a threat, but a message from someone who knew exactly how to find me, someone who had been watching from just far enough away for just long enough. Meet me where the fire stopped. I knew where that was. The Shasta Ridge fire burned over 20,000 acres in 2003, but there had been a clear boundary, a natural stone outcrop near the northern bend of the river. That's where the flames died. The fire crews always said the wind shifted there, abruptly, like nature itself had drawn a line. We used to call it the edge. I packed a flashlight, a field notebook, a voice recorder, and one of the old group photos, the one with all 10 of us, the one where I now knew there should have been 11. Will wanted to come. I told him no. "If this is Ellis," I said, "he's not going to come out if there's 2 of us." He didn't argue, just nodded and said, "Be careful." It took 2 hours to hike out there. The path wasn't marked anymore, but I remembered the rhythm of the terrain, where the pines thinned out, where the ground sloped toward the cliffside. And when I reached it, that outcrop of jagged stone where the fire had stopped, I knew I was in the right place. Everything was still. Dew still. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots on dry dirt and the crunch of my breath. And then I saw him. He was sitting on the edge of the stone shelf, knees drawn up, hood pulled over his head, thin frame, barefoot, just like the silhouette from the photo. He didn't flinch when I approached, didn't even look up. I stopped a few feet away. "Nellis?" I asked. A long silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "You finally remembered my name." His voice was rough, not from age, from disuse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "I didn't know," I said. "None of us did. You weren't in the records. You weren't in the photos. It's like they erased you." "They did," he said flatly, "but not before they left me." I felt my heart cave in. "Who left you?" I asked, even though I already knew. He slowly turned his head. His face was thinner now, hollowed by time but familiar. Somewhere under the dirt and sunburn and layers of survival was the face of a teenager who had once boarded a school van and disappeared into fire. "All of them," he said, "even you. I didn't know you were with us." He didn't respond. "I was just a kid," I added. "We all were." His eyes drifted toward the treetops. They ran screaming. I stayed behind. I didn't know where to go, so I hid, dug into the roots under a tree and waited for someone to come back. My throat tightened. "How did you survive?" He smiled faintly, same way I've survived ever since, quietly. "Why now?" I asked. "Why reach out after all these years?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Anger, grief, relief. "Because they stopped looking, and you started asking the right questions." He reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in a torn bandana. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was a necklace, faded red string, a cheap plastic whistle. Josh's whistle. I remembered it. He wore it around his neck every day of the trip. "I found it," Ellis said, "a week after the fire, on the ridge. No one else was there. No bodies, no backpacks, just that." He paused. "They made it out. I think some of them did, but they never came back." "Why would they do that?" He shrugged. "Maybe they thought I died. Maybe they didn't care." My hands were shaking. "You left messages," I said. "You carved my name." "I wanted you to feel it," he said. "The forgetting, the silence, the erasure." He stood now slowly, like someone who hadn't stood in a while. "I don't need saving," he added. "I'm not broken. I just wanted someone to remember that I was real." You are, I said, you still are. He nodded once, then started walking toward the tree line. I called after him. Ellis, where are you going? He turned briefly, back to where they stopped caring. And then he was gone, swallowed by the forest. I sat on that stone edge for a long time, holding Josh's whistle. The sun dipped behind the ridge. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt the full weight of everything we'd lost and everything we'd chosen not to see. I didn't go back to the motel right away. I sat in the Jeep parked near the tree line, the plastic whistle still wrapped in the tattered red string, resting in the passenger seat like a ghost. It weighed almost nothing, and yet it felt heavier than anything I'd carried from that summer. I must have stared at it for an hour. I kept thinking about Ellis's voice, brittle and slow, like he was learning to speak again. There was no rage in him, no dramatic outburst. He didn't need to scream. He had let the silence do the talking for 20 years. That's the thing no one prepares you for about being forgotten. It doesn't shout, it whispers, slowly, every day, until you start to wonder if maybe you were never real at all. Back at the motel, Will was waiting on the steps, pacing. You found him, didn't you? I just nodded. His jaw clenched. Is he okay? No, I said, but he's alive. Will sat down hard on the curb, like someone had knocked the wind out of him. I sat next to him and handed him the whistle. He stared at it. Josh's, he whispered. He found it, I said, days after the fire, near the ridge. Will turned the plastic over in his hands. I don't remember seeing him, not once, not on the bus, not at camp. But now that I'm thinking about it, I remember one night I woke up to someone crying, not just scared sobbing. I thought it was Dana, but maybe it was him. He shook his head. God, Ethan, how did we miss a whole person? I didn't have an answer. Maybe no one does. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the old high school. The building was still there, same beige concrete, same cracked parking lot. The sign out front had a new principal's name, but everything else was frozen in time. I asked the front desk if they still had archived student files from 2003. It took some convincing, but after a few calls, they brought out a battered green file box. I flipped through the folders, photos, class lists, disciplinary notes. And then, tucked between two misfiled slips, I found a Polaroid. No name, just a year, 2003, Outdoor Ed Group 4. There were 11 kids in the picture. One of them slightly apart from the rest, as if caught mid-step, was Ellis Marsh. He had that same quiet posture, same hollow stare, like even then, before the fire, before the silence, he knew he didn't belong. I brought the photo to the woman at the desk. Do you know who this is? I asked. She squinted. I think that's Ellis Marsh maybe. He was only here a month, group home transfer, real quiet kid. What happened to his file? She shrugged. Foster placement records were always messy. Lot of missing info back then. They changed systems in 2004. Some of it got lost. I didn't respond. Because that's exactly what happened to Ellis, lost in the shuffle, in the system, in our memories. That afternoon, I sat across from Will at a diner just outside town. We hadn't said much since the night before. I think we should tell someone, I said. The police, a journalist, someone who will listen. Will stirred his coffee without looking at me, and tell them what? That we left a kid behind, that he survived, that we have proof. You think they'll believe us, you think they'll care. I think I owe it to him. Will looked up. You think he wants that? You think Ellis wants to be pulled out into the open, talked about like some ghost story? I didn't answer. Ethan, he said quietly, you got what you came for. You found out what happened. He's alive. That's more than we ever thought we'd get. But it's not enough, I said. He stared at me. I think we all left something back there, I added, and I don't think any of us ever really came back. Will looked down at the whistle. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. I wrote a letter that night. To Ellis. I don't know if he'll ever read it. I don't know if he even wants to, but I wrote it anyway. I told him I was sorry. Not just for forgetting, not just for leaving, but for being part of a world that looked the other way when someone like him disappeared. I told him I remembered now. that he was real, that he mattered. And I drove back out to the ridge, to the edge, and tucked the letter beneath a stone, beside the place where he stood when he told me he didn't need saving. The wind picked up as I walked back to the Jeep. And for just a second, I thought I saw a figure in the trees. Not running, not hiding, just watching, like he always had. The drive back into town felt different this time. There wasn't the same pressure in my chest, that frantic need to find something. The whistle sat on the passenger seat like it had been there all along, like it belonged there. But the real weight, the one I hadn't known I was carrying, had shifted. I hadn't found all the answers. The others were still gone. The fire had taken them, or something had. But I knew one thing for sure now: Ellis Marsh survived. And he remembered everything. The motel was half empty. I passed the front desk without checking in again. The same clerk gave me a blank look and said nothing. Maybe he could tell from my face that I hadn't slept. Or maybe he'd learned, like the rest of this town, not to ask questions about the summer of 2003. Will was sitting by the window, cross-legged on the bed, flipping through my old camping journal, the one I thought I'd lost. He'd found it under the nightstand, exactly where I swore I checked 3 times. "Did you put it there?" I asked. He looked up and shook his head. "No," he said, "but someone wanted you to find it again." We spent the afternoon calling the families again. Josh's parents didn't answer. Dana's sister hung up before I could finish the sentence, but Miguel's mother, she stayed on the line, quiet but listening. When I told her about Ellis, she didn't say a word for a long time. Then she whispered, "So he was there." "Yes," I said, "he was, and he remembers everything." She let out a shaky breath. I used to think maybe they'd just disappeared, that something took them away all at once, but now it feels worse. I waited. "They were left behind," she said, "not by a fire, not by fate, but by us." That stayed with me. That night, Will and I walked the outskirts of the ridge one last time. No gear, no camera, just the whistle and a flashlight. We weren't looking for Ellis, not really. We were trying to understand how we had ever forgotten a person who lived right beside us for 5 days, who ate at our fire, hiked the same paths, slept under the same trees. The truth was uncomfortable. It didn't come in a dramatic revelation or some neat, redemptive arc. It was messier than that. We hadn't seen Ellis because we hadn't wanted to. He didn't talk much. He stayed near the back of the group. He was just another foster kid in a system that turned faces into files and files into afterthoughts. And when everything went wrong, when the fire came, his name wasn't even on the search list. It made me sick. And it made me realize something I hadn't admitted until now. We all survived differently. Some of us ran, some of us waited, some of us tried to forget. Ellis watched. Not out of choice, out of necessity. And now, for the first time, someone had watched back. A few days later, I left Shasta Ridge. I didn't tell anyone I was going, not even Will. I just packed the Jeep, folded the whistle into my glove box, and drove south. I passed the ranger station where I'd first emerged from the woods 2 decades ago, bloody, soot-covered, half-conscious. I remembered the medic asking me, were there others, and me shaking my head, too tired to speak. There were others. And one of them was still out there. I don't think Ellis wants to be saved. I think he wants to be left alone on his terms, not like before, not like the first time when silence was forced on him. He's still in that forest, watching, moving, surviving. But now, at least, someone knows he's there. He isn't a ghost. He's real. And I remember him. Before I crossed the county line, I stopped one last time at the edge of the forest. The air was still, no wind, no sound. I took out the journal, tore the last page, wrote 3 words with the old charcoal pencil tucked in the spine. "You are seen." Then I folded it, placed it inside the whistle, and hung it from the lowest branch of a scorched pine tree, the same one where we carved our names that last night. Mine's there now, too. Not because I died out here, but because I finally understand what it means to live with what we left behind. A month after I left Shasta Ridge, a letter arrived at my apartment in Portland. No return address, just my name written in uneven, almost childlike print. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was faded, time-warped, like it had been buried in a metal box for years. At first I didn't recognize what I was looking at. It showed a trail, dirt, low brush, a crooked signpost. Then I saw the initials carved into the wood at the bottom of the sign. E plus W plus D. Ellis Will Dana. It hit me like a gut punch. Ellis hadn't been forgotten, not by everyone. Someone had known he was there, at least two of them. And still they left. There was nothing else in the envelope, just the photo. No message, no date. But it told me more than any words could. I started visiting families again. Not to pry, just to listen. Miguel's mother kept her son's drawings framed in the hallway, tiny sketches of trees and wildflowers. She asked if Ellis had ever said anything about Miguel's final moments. He didn't, I admitted, but he remembered him. She smiled, a small one, that's enough. Cara Bowman's uncle still lived in her childhood home. He hadn't changed anything in her room. Ribbons and books, a pink backpack with broken zippers. He asked about the camera, if it really was mine. I showed him the prints. When he saw the group photo, he froze, not because of the campers. Because of the background. Is that the big rock? He asked. I nodded, the one near the creek. He squinted. That's where they said she went missing, but she told me once she was scared of that place, said it didn't feel right. Why not? He looked away, said she heard voices when they hiked past it, said someone kept whispering her name. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, I got a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer. I sat there staring at the screen, heart suddenly racing again. But something in me, something that had been rewired by all of this, made me pick up. The voice was soft, male, tired. Did you leave the letter in the whistle? It was Ellis. Yes, I said, I meant it. A long silence. I saw Will, he said finally. 2 nights ago, he came alone. What happened? He sat by the fire, said my name out loud. Another pause. And he didn't ask for forgiveness, Ellis said. He just listened. That moment broke something open in me. We'd spent so many years trying to solve the mystery, to track every name and retrace every step, but in the end, it wasn't about blame or rescue. It was about witnessing. We weren't there to save Ellis. We were there to say, we see you now. And maybe for someone like him, that's what survival really means, not escaping the flames, but enduring the silence that follows. I asked if he wanted help, a ride, a place to stay. No, he said gently, the forest is home now. Are you sure? I know every tree by sound, he replied. I know which ones creak in the wind and which ones hum when it's going to rain. I know the moss patterns. I know the silence. Out there I'm whole. I swallowed. I don't think I'll ever come back, he added, but I wanted you to know you did right. Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. And then I cried, not the hard, angry kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, finally. That spring, a memorial was erected on the outer rim of the Shasta Ridge fire zone. It was simple, a ring of stones set in the earth, 10 names, the same ones from every article, every plaque, every forgotten newsletter. But I brought my own stone. I etched it myself. A marsh. Survived but not untouched. I placed it just outside the ring, not within the 10, but facing them, watching, like he always had. I don't know if anyone else will notice it. But it doesn't matter. Because now someone does. And that's enough. 20 years ago, I came out of the forest with smoke in my lungs and someone else's story on my back. I didn't know it at the time. Back then, I thought I'd barely escaped with my own. But as the years passed, as the headlines faded, and the school rebuilt its gymnasium, and the town rebranded the hiking trails, I began to understand something no one ever taught us. Survival doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it means staying. Sometimes it means being forgotten and remembering yourself anyway. Ellis did that. He carried his silence like a second skin. He carved names into trees not to haunt us, but to remind the earth, I was here too. Most people think trauma is a thing that comes and goes, a fire that burns through and disappears. But it doesn't. It lingers in the bones, in the quiet. It hums under the surface of ordinary life, a grocery store, a train whistle, a campsite brochure. It stays, and it waits for someone to say, finally, I see you. I remember. Every year now, on the anniversary of the fire, I return to the ridge. Not with cameras, not with questions. Just a thermos of coffee and a folding chair. I sit near the tree where I hung the whistle. I watch the sun rise over the blackened pines that never quite grew back. Sometimes I talk. Out loud. To no one. Or maybe to someone who might be just past the tree line, listening. I don't expect Ellis to come back. I think part of him never left those woods, and maybe part of me didn't either. But I carry his name. The way he once carried ours. Last year, a ranger from the Forest Service called me, said a group of volunteers had cleared a trail near Dogwood Creek. They found something under a pile of stacked stone, a handmade journal sealed in plastic. Inside were drawings. One for each of us. Simple childlike sketches, a football, a sketchbook, a campfire, a river, a tent with 11 stick figures holding hands. On the back page, just 5 words. I waited, you came back. They asked me what I wanted to do with it. I told them to leave it. Seal it back up. Put it right where they found it. Because not everything that's lost needs to be rescued. Some things just need to be witnessed. There's a line I read once, scribbled into the margin of a burned book someone left in the visitor center. The forest keeps what the fire misses. I think about that a lot. The names, the faces, the memories, they're not buried. They're growing quietly beneath the ash. Not to be dug up, but to become part of the soil. And if you stand still long enough, if you listen, really listen, you'll hear them. Not calling out in pain, but in peace. Like wind through old pine. Like a whisper on the ridge. Like a voice saying, finally, I'm still here. And now you are too.